Hello, everyone. My name is Cathy Grow. I am the transition coordinator at the Warrior Run School District. Warrior Run is a very rural school in the center of Pennsylvania. We span 3 different counties: Northumberland, Montour, and Union. I've been working in this district now for 24 years. I started working here in 1997 as a multi-disabilities teacher. I also worked in a life skills classroom years later, and also worked in learning support classes. In particular, I taught science. I started as a transition coordinator about 7 years ago. I graduated from Bloomsburg University back in 1996 with my bachelor's degree in special education. I then got my master's degree in special education at Bloomsburg as well, along with my supervisory certification in special education. I'm married and I have 3 children, which I'd like to tell you because I have a bit of experience with my own children who also need specially designed instruction to be successful in school. My first son, Trevor, he's 23 years old. He is now working full-time at Walmart. He, in school, was identified as a student with central auditory processing disorder, which, if you do not know, you're able to hear things, without a problem, but when you hear speech, it kind of goes in your ears and then to your brain, which it kind of gets a little jumbled up. And so sometimes they don't answer questions correctly. He has a really difficult time sequencing events. So if he's trying to tell me something that happened at work or at school, sometimes he can get a little jumbled up in putting them in order. There are some other issues that he's had cognitively where it's been very difficult for him to remember certain things. So it is something that I've already gone through this transition process. Actually, I was his transition coordinator. So I kind of have experience helping him out, which I think was a real eye-opener for me helping other people. As well as I have a 17-year-old son who is a senior this year. His name is Aiden. He is a severe stutterer. Aiden did have an IEP years ago with a speech disorder, but thanks to ongoing therapy, we worked a lot on advocacy for him so that he could stand up for himself, when to kind of tell people about your disability and stand up for yourself. So that is something we worked really hard with him. He did get exited from special education, so he does not currently have an IEP as a senior. My youngest son, who is 14 years old, his name is Drew. He's in the 9th grade. Just about 2 years ago, he got identified with a math disability. His disability really stems from fear of math, which is one of the subjects that he just does not like, but also he is lagging behind his peers. So it's about him trying to catch up in math, and hopefully he will be exited from special education at some point, but right now he is still using his IEP to be successful in school. So I am going to try to be careful not to use a lot of educational terms without saying what they stand for. So if at some point you don't understand what I'm saying or you have questions about what I'm saying, you are more than welcome to email me at cgrow, GROW, at wrsd.org. You can also contact me. My phone number is 570-649-5138, extension 4117. I'd be more than willing to have a conversation with you about your own child or about someone that you're supporting, whether or not that's a student or adult in the community who might need a little extra support in getting a job. I've done that with others, and I'd be more than willing to speak with you. So one of the probably the most important part about what I do is kind of destroying the stigma of having a disability. Now, we're going to be talking about students who are given very little support to be successful, to those students or adults that need a lot of support to be successful. So, the disability category is wide and large. And so I want to make sure that I touch on all of the different types of disabilities that are affecting our student population and also adults as well. So what I want to say is that it's really important that students identify that just because they have an educational, I like to say an educational disability, they may need extra math help, or they have trouble reading, or they have trouble sequencing items like my first child did, or they are terrible at writing. These are issues that a lot of people have, and it's just about what do they need to be successful. So everybody can be successful. I don't care what your disability is, but how can you be supported to being successful? And so there's nothing wrong with identifying yourself as having a disability and needing help. And a lot of times what I do is that I tell them I myself have a medical disability. And even though you cannot see it, it doesn't mean I don't have it. So I have something called essential tremor, which causes me to shake. And I share that in my classes with my students because I want them to see that sometimes I may have a little bit of a difficulty holding a pair of scissors and cutting someone's hair because you don't want me to stick the scissors into your head, for example, because I'm shaking so bad. So maybe I need help opening up a bottle of water. So even though you don't see that I have a disability, I do have one. And we have many kids who have what they call an invisible disability, meaning you can't tell that they have a disability, which is like all three of my children. You cannot tell they have a disability that impacts them here at school. So some kids you can obviously see they have a disability. However, that does not mean that they should use that to make themselves different sometimes in some ways, if that makes sense at all. In other words, you can still go out and do what other people do. You just do it slightly different, and that's okay. And I think it's important for us as parents or people who support individuals with disabilities that we identify and talk about their disability. What disability do they have? How can we help them advocate for themselves? How can we get them to see that everybody has some sort of skills they need to work on, or a lot of us have some sort of disability, whether it impacts them educationally or impacts them medically. We need to be able to talk about it, and it's okay. And if they have mental health disabilities, for example, we need to be able to talk about it. So I always say destroying the stigma of a disability. I have a lot of students who refuse to talk about the fact that they have a disability. And sometimes when we bring it up in class, they do not disclose their disabilities unless they eventually want to, and that's totally up to them. But then we talk about how they can advocate for themselves. And it's really quite great when they finally realize, yeah, you know what, I do have these, problems, and this is the way I can best be supported to be successful. And once they do that for themselves, it's amazing to see them blossom. So I'll be going over that a little bit more. So I put students to work in what's called work internships throughout the community, which is an unpaid work experience where they learn job skills. One of the things that I find with employers is they constantly say to me, we have students these days who lack work ethic, including adults that work there currently, lack work ethic. They struggle to communicate with people. They don't take initiative. So those are kind of like the three main topics that they talk about. So I'm going to show you and share this Padlet that I'm going to make, and it has a lot of resources in it. So it says, teach your students what it takes to be a perfect employee. So they have to be responsible. They have to have a good appearance, be cooperative, trustworthy, have a good self-esteem. That is something else we're going to be talking about. They have to have good communication. They have to be friendly and trustworthy. So these are all of the things that it's good that we take time to teach our kids these things. They don't just pick it up on their own. It's stuff that we do have to talk about, which when I first started, I just assumed that a lot of kids had self-confidence. What I found is most kids do not. And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, I took a student to do an interview, and it was at a vet care place, and she spoke really well. I had assumed, and we talked a little bit about on the way to the interview about some questions that she was going to be asked. And I really thought that she would nail this interview. We got there and she sat down, and the boss said to her, the supervisor said to her, "So tell me, what are your strengths?" And I sat there right next to her, and she sat there for a while, and she just stared blankly ahead, and she didn't say anything. And of course, in my head, I'm thinking, pick something, and I'm thinking maybe she's trying to pick the one that she thinks would be the best. And she said, "I don't have any strengths." And I turned to look at her, just shocked. And the supervisor kind of looked at me briefly, and then she goes, "Okay, well, then tell me a weakness. Tell me something that you feel like you need to work on." And again, we paused, waited for her to answer, and she had no answer. And she said, "I can't really think of anything right now." And at that moment, that was a light bulb for me. I was shocked. So we got out to the car after the interview was over, and I said to her, I said, "Can you tell me one strength that you have as a person?" I said, don't focus on work. What is one strength you have as a person?" And she goes, "I don't have any." I was like, oh my gosh, yes, you do. You have so many positive things about you. And I just started to list them. And she almost started to cry when I was listing them. And she goes, "No one's really said that about me before." And to be perfectly honest, I was shocked. So from that moment on, I took that as a lesson, and I decided that I am going to focus on making sure that students know their strengths, and they also need to know what they need to improve on. And as I always tell my students, it doesn't mean that I think you're lacking or that this is a problem, because we all have things that we have to work on. It's identifying those things you have to work on and then bettering yourself. And I also kind of really harp on the strengths, and if they don't have strengths, I will give them strengths so that they realize that they are worthy individuals of being able to list many strengths about themselves. So if you can see on here, it said 10 skills that employers are looking for. One is initiative, communication, teamwork, negotiation and persuasion, problem solving, leadership, organization, perseverance and motivation, ability to work under pressure, and confidence. So confidence, of course, was the last thing that I talked about earlier. One of the things I also say is sometimes if you don't have self-confidence about something, you have to fake it till you make it, which I think all of us have heard that statement before. So I try to teach them how they can fake it. And once they fake it, then I kind of tell them what they need to do to make sure that they are able to get that confidence that they need. So what I want to talk about real quickly out of all of those things is number 6, which is leadership. I really work hard with my students and the people that I work with to understand that leadership is not just the CEO of a company. Leadership is anyone at any time who does something that shows leadership skills. For example, when an employee is training someone at McDonald's who just got a job, and you are training that person who is a new hire, you are being a leader. If you are working at Bonanza Restaurant and you are taking over as a waitress over in one section, in that section, you are the leader. So it doesn't have to be a boss, a manager, or anyone like that. It can be simply you showing leadership skills at a particular time. And I've asked students, what do you think it means to be a leader? And many of them had said, well, you have to take initiative and you have to go above and beyond and you have to work really hard. And those were all great answers because they're all true. And so if you want to be a leader, you do have to take initiative and you do have to work hard. So you want to go above and beyond. So for example, if you get a call, my middle son works at Wise's and a guy doesn't show up to cover a shift. And so the manager calls you and says, hey, listen, would you be willing to cover the shift for me because so-and-so didn't show up? Maybe you just don't want to go to work that day because you're tired. But sometimes if you say yes, and you go and work that extra shift, you're showing initiative. And that's going to get noticed. Maybe not by someone saying something, but eventually they're going to take notice. And that's where managers come from. And a lot of students say, I want to be a manager. I want to be a boss. Well, then you've got to work on those leadership skills. So those are some things that they really need to hone on. Those are things, all of these things that we talked about, these 10 things are things that you can start to do early. And when I mean early, I mean in elementary school. You can show them how to communicate correctly. You can tell them about problem solving and allow them to problem solve on their own. And when they need extra help in order to complete it, support them in doing that. And then when they finally finish it, you celebrate that. You also want to teach them about perseverance and motivation. So when they're out there playing kickball with their friends and they get frustrated because, maybe Johnny is beating them at the time, talk about what can you do to make yourself better than at that sport. Maybe you need to practice at home doing kickball before you go to school and you start playing kickball with Johnny. So those are some of the things that you can work on every day. And we support our own biological children. I call my children, but then I also call my students kids. It's my kids. So you might hear me say that term. So some of the trainings that I do in particular with high school students is Indeed.com has a lot of online courses that can be beneficial to students or to adults who are trying to gain some skills. So for example, how to do resumes, how to do interviews, how to dress appropriately, those kinds of things you can actually gain from this Indeed.com. And they have a lot of support for jobs. Whenever I do job applications with my students, we always do them through Indeed.com. We put their resumes on there. We put all of their information on there with the approval from their parents. This way, when they do apply for jobs, my students know exactly where to go and how to do it on their own without the support of me, but I was there to help them prep all the information in the beginning. The next one you want to look at is PA Career Link, pa.gov, and they have something called Skill Up PA, which is basically different types of online courses that you can take that can help you. One of those that I showed students recently is there are different types of interviews you want to think about: phone interviews, in-person interviews, Zoom interviews, and panel interviews. And the skills needed for each one of those is different. So you might want to get on pacareerlink.pa.gov and look at all of the online courses that you can take to teach you how to do those things. Again, good for students, good for adults. But I want to say that we're going to talk a little bit about if you have a student who is getting ready to graduate, but they still need more career readiness preparation. We are going to talk about them a little bit further on. We talk right here about the towards supported employment. So the next drop-down menu that we have here is about employment. And this one shows you what are the 5 most common interview questions, okay? I've had a lot of students who struggle with these, and we did talk about a student earlier who struggled with what are your strengths and weaknesses. But we should also talk about, tell me about yourself. And we call this an elevator pitch. So you should take about a minute or 2 and develop your elevator pitch. And this is something I do in presentations when I start to talk about myself, is that I think about what I'm going to say and I review it in my head over and over and over again until you have it down. So it is something that we do here in school with what we call senior exit interviews. They do have to develop an elevator pitch, but myself, ask students to talk about specific things and continue to do that conversation over and over again. The more they introduce themselves to all different sorts of people, not even just during an interview, the better they're going to get at it. So when you are out and about and you see someone, you can say, hey, why don't you introduce yourself? It may even be a friend of yours, but ask your child, hey, why don't you tell them what your name is? Those are types of things that you can do when you're out in public to get your child to understand that communication is key and they need to be able to talk about themselves. The next one would be, why should we hire you? I do this a lot. I ask students to get onto the internet, Google the place where they want to work, and start stalking it. And I use that as a funny with them because they know what I mean is get on there and look at the people who work there. What are their names? What are they dressed like? What do they do? Watch the videos that they put on there. What are they looking for? What is their mission statement? All of those are really important things that you need to learn about the place that you want to work, because you want to be answer, why should we hire you? And then on the 4th one down, why do you want to work for this company? You should be able to answer those 2 questions after looking on the website page of whatever employer you want to work at. So along with your elevator pitch, you might want to spend some time jotting down some notes as to why you want to work for that company. Also, the last one, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Most of the time, employers want you to stay. So if you see yourself staying there, you certainly could say, I would love to still be employed here. I would like to grow or advance in the company. I would like to have my own house. I would like to, whatever you want to say. But you kind of have to think about what you want your future to look like. The other thing that I want to talk about is soft skills for employment. This is really important. There's a difference between hard skills and soft skills. So hard skills are things that you can learn. That's about, how do you operate Microsoft Word? But soft skills are things that aren't so tangible. You don't see them per se. So it's clear communication, listening skills. This is another one that's top on the list. You need to be able to sit down and listen to someone talk to you and understand what they're saying and be able to do what they're asking you to do. And if not, what do you do? And that's something that you have to teach students and adults. What do you do when you don't understand something? Sometimes that little question is enough for them to give you an answer, and you can then determine on whether or not they're understanding problem solving. Another one is self-control. We all get mad at a certain time. What do you do when you get angry? That's really important. And you can't just gloss over that. You kind of have to say, okay, who can you go to? How do you calm down? Do you need to step away? Make sure you don't say something that's going to get you in trouble. And how do you problem solve that? The next one, positive attitude. I always say nobody wants a Debbie Downer. It's really hard to work with negative people all the time. If you are around someone who's negative all the time, it's going to start to impact your mood. So you want to keep with positive people. If there is someone who works with you that is negative all the time, you kind of want to separate yourself from that person as much as possible. And hopefully your positive attitude will go on to them versus the other way around. The next one is assertiveness. And this is through communication. I always say there's a difference between assertiveness and aggressiveness. And I actually do a little bit of a training on this, is that there are certain ways to say things and there are certain ways not to say things. And having any sort of aggressive attitude is not going to do you any, it's not going to give you anything positive. It's only going to give you negatives. So you must learn to be assertive, but not aggressive. So as you can continue on to see, you also have to have manners and self-management, time management being very important. You need to talk about what's on time, what's considered late. You don't want to show up for work 30 minutes ahead of time. In some places, that is considered to be wasting their time. You can't just get on, you can't just log onto the clock, and you can't just sit around and start talking to other people and taking them away from their jobs. So when is a good time to show up? When are you able to leave? And do you work all the way up until the time you're supposed to leave? So those are things that you need to focus on. Confidence, focus, common sense, situational awareness, what's going on around you. If you're done doing your job, what job can you do? I'm very particular about telling my kids that they cannot just stand around and wait. When you are done doing a job that you were supposed to do, then you either go find something to do or you ask somebody to give you something to do. You need to make sure that you're taking initiative in that. And I'll give you another story that's kind of funny. So the one time I went into this hardware store where one of my students was working, and as soon as I walked in, he was standing by the cash register and he was just standing there and he looked at me like he had been caught. I mean, he was, if you could see his eyes, they were as big can be. And I kind of smiled a little bit and I said, "Hey, I'm looking for the supervisor." I said him by name and it's like, "Yeah, sure, let me get him." And so I had him fill out, I have him fill out a survey. It's like a 5-question survey, and that helps give the student a visitation grade. So he came down, I gave him the survey to complete, and then I said, "Thank you." And I left because the student was working. I had to go visit another student. And as I got back to school, I could see in front of the front lobby, the student that I had just seen at the hardware store, he was pacing back and forth in front of the lobby. And I came in and he's like, "Oh my gosh, Mrs. Grow, I had to come and tell you I'm sorry." I go, "About what?" And he said, "When you came to the hardware store, you saw me standing there at the cash register and I wasn't doing anything." And I said, "Okay." And so he's like, "I want to tell you I'm sorry." I go, "Well, what were you doing?" And he says, "Well, they were teaching me how to use the cash register and I was observing her making transactions." And I said, I'll just use the word John again. I'm like, "John, you were doing something. You were observing her work the cash register, which is a very important skill for you to learn. So no, you weren't doing anything. You were observing her, and that's okay." But I thought it was great because he was very concerned that he had done something wrong, which I don't want to put the fear in them, but I kind of liked the idea that he realized that just standing around looked wrong. And he felt like he needed to explain it to me. So I really thought that he learned a good skill that day. And by the way, he got hired there full time. So they really liked him. So anyways, let's talk about enthusiasm, optimism, taking responsibility, and sometimes a sense of humor, which I like to do with my students is, it's about work. Work's sometimes hard, but let's make it fun at certain times when we can. And so every situation that a student has a difficult time in when it comes to work, I make it a learning experience, but I also make them realize that it's okay. It's something we're going to learn. Sometimes things are funny, sometimes they're not, but I want them to realize that we can't be serious all the time. So the next one is about workplace etiquette. It's a transition from a student to professional. And this is really important. So if you could click on this YouTube, it's like a 6-minute video. It's about workplace etiquette. It goes over a lot of information that I feel that's really important for students to understand, because workplace etiquette is something a lot of students and adults don't understand. Like, do you become best friends with the people that you work with? Should you get on social media sites and post things that you shouldn't post that maybe a boss is going to see? So also, do you go to a party that your job is having where you might do something that you could get in trouble for? I mean, there's just so many different etiquette things that you might want to think about. So take the time, view this video. If you have students in high school, even into adulthood, and you want to show them this video, I suggest that you do, because it's pretty good. One of the other things I think that's really important to talk about when we're talking about employment is when to disclose your disability at work. So I did include let me make sure that this is, yeah. So youth disclosure and the workplace: why, when, what, and how. So there are certain times when you want to disclose the fact that you have a disability. And in order to do that, one, you have to be able to identify what your disability is and what accommodations do you need to be successful, which is one of the reasons why I try to destroy the stigma of having a disability. And then also we talk about what accommodations do they need to be successful. Maybe they need to write things down, because when someone verbally tells them something, they can't remember it all. So, but those are things that you don't have to have a disability, but you still require that, and that's okay. There are certain things that I need to do. For example, if I don't put it in my calendar, I won't remember it. So I can't just write it down like some other people do. I'm not as nice and neat as what some other people are, because maybe I won't be able to find it. Like the person that works with me, she's very nice and neat, and she enjoys her stuff to be that way, and she can find her things. Me, I'm a little bit more of a mess, but that's okay. I get all my work done and I know where everything is. So when do you disclose your disability? I always tell students, you might not want to disclose your disability, again, because this is their choice during an interview. However, if you're like my 17-year-old son, Aiden, who stutters, he went to his interview for the first time at Wise's. And as I say, he stutters. You know it. As soon as he starts talking, you can tell. And so I said to him, I was very nervous about his first interview. So I sat down with him and I said, Aiden, your stuttering is like the elephant in the room. So you might as well say, hi, my name is Aiden, and just so you know, I stutter. And just get it out there. Because otherwise, they're going to wonder, why is he talking like that? Have they met anybody who stuttered before? Do they think he might be doing something else and that's why he's stuttering? Or maybe they think he has a different type of disability. So I made sure that he knew, okay, well, let's just get it out there and go from there. And that's what he did. And he immediately got the job, which, I thought was great. It's one of those things, like I said, one of the main things that I did with Aiden and that we did here at school with Aiden was to teach him how to advocate for himself. He's always going to stutter. No amount of therapy is going to take that away. So I have to make sure he understands how to speak up for himself in every situation, because I'm not always going to be around. So he needs to know how to advocate for himself. Okay, so now kind of talking about students who want to go to college or tech school. So I do work with students who want to go to college, and a lot of students with disabilities do choose to go to college. But again, you need to know what accommodations you need. And you also need to register with the disability office at whatever college or tech school you're going to. And you have to know the type of accommodations that colleges will allow you to have. There are many accommodations that we give here in the high school that will not be allowed in college. So during the time of your junior, senior year, you kind of need to start pulling back supports a little bit if your goal is to go to college, so that you're able to kind of transition more smoothly. Again, because those supports may not be there in college. And if that's the case, we need to be able for you to see that now versus when you get into college and you start to struggle and you can't get maybe a reduced amount of questions on a test. So it's good that we practice that now while we're in high school and prepare you for that college. So if you look on to this first site right here, it says bestcolleges.com. This talks about college resources for students with disabilities. So what is your disability and what accommodations do you need? So there are rights, which is down here at the second one. What are your rights? Students with disabilities preparing for post-secondary education. So what can they give you as accommodation wise? And it is listed on here if you want to click on there to see the accommodations that they can give you. Every school is slightly different. So you want to make sure that you check for the school that you are interested in, as whether or not they have the accommodations that you want. But also, again, we talked about disability offices. So in order to get accommodations at a college, your IEP or your RR, which is a reevaluation report, and your testing needs to be within 3 years of you entering college. So what that means is that you might need to be retested, because a lot of students who get identified for special education services, usually that happens in the elementary grades, and you might not get retested, like psychological evaluation retesting done for many, many years, sometimes the rest of your educational career. But if you want to go to college, they're going to want updated testing. So you're going to need updated testing, and we'll talk more about that later on when we talk about agencies that offer support. And then you take that documentation to the disability services, and they will basically give you an intake, and you will start the process of getting them started. I always tell students, it doesn't matter if you think you're going to need the accommodations or not. Still sign up for disability offices services. Do it anyways. The main reasons why, we'll give you an example. Say you are going into biology and you think, I've had biology in high school, I'm not going to have a problem. But then you get to college and you realize, oh my gosh, this is a lot harder than I expected. And I'm not really understanding the content very well. And I feel like I need someone to read these terms to me, or the professor needs to provide me notes. I need to sign up for disability services. Well, sometimes those services take a long time to get started. And by that time, your grade may have dropped significantly before you got services started. So start before you enter college, getting those disability services set up, and hopefully you'll never need them. Let's just hope. But if you do, you're already signed up and ready to go. That's the most important thing. The other thing you need to think about is also preparing for college. So if you're a student with disabilities and you are going to be living on campus, or one of the other things too that we didn't talk about is taking the SATs, which, by the way, you can take with accommodations. You have to make sure that you talk to your guidance counselor about getting approved for accommodations in order to take the SAT. So if you didn't know about that, you should have a conversation with your guidance counselor about that. But you should have some preparation before you're moving on to college. So this one down here, it says preparing for college. This gives you some success tips for students with disabilities. And again, we're talking about all students with disabilities. So if you're talking about a learning support kid who just has, you could be talking about a student with a math disability like my son Drew has, and he's planning on going to college, then this is something you might want to look at, and it may pertain to you or it may not. So it's something to think of. The next one that we're going to talk about, this is for students who are more impacted by their disability, and we need to talk about ongoing career readiness preparations. So what I mean by supported employment is whether it's with a job coach who helps support that student, and that can be a very short-term job coach support or a long-term, meaning maybe even for the rest of their life. They need someone to support them in employment, and that's fine. So what are some of the career readiness preparation around here where we are in central Pennsylvania? There are certainly places around where you live, wherever that may be. You're just going to have to Google that in order to find that information. So most of the stuff that you see here is anywhere throughout the United States. I'm sure they have them around where you are. You just have to do a little bit of research to find it. So the first one talks about Hope Enterprises. So Hope Enterprises is a place in Williamsport, and I've actually been there a couple times. And as I told you, I've been working, I've been working with individuals with disabilities since I was a sophomore in college. So when I became a sophomore in college, I started working at a group home, which was called an ICF, which is an intermediate care facility. It's for individuals with disabilities, cognitive disabilities, but also students with or clients with physical disabilities and medical disabilities. So these were individuals that had definitely a lot more medical needs. So I worked there for probably 8 years working in the group home. And one of the places that our clients would go was Hope Enterprises. At the time, years and years ago, they had something called a sheltered workshop. A sheltered workshop was a place where they work on contracted work from different types of businesses in the area. So an example would be a place wanted you to take these hangers and put clips on them so that they could hang shirts from these hangers without the shirt kind of sliding off. So they had to attach these clips. And back then it was something called piecework. And in other words, every time a person clipped on the clips on the hangers, they would get 19 cents for every hanger they completed. Some individuals would take 6 hours to do 20 hangers at 19 cents a piece. So you realize they got paid very, very little. And then there were some individuals who did a lot of hangers. There were different types of contracts depending on where they were within the sheltered workshop. Some individuals who were more impacted and maybe not able to use their hands as much, they did different types of jobs than other individuals did. Again, all the same thing. They were not paid a rate that even slightly compared to other peers who were not working there. So as of, I would say maybe 8-10 years ago, I guess, it's been so long, they had decided they were going to close down the sheltered workshops and start focusing on career readiness preparation for these individuals, and that everybody deserves to be a working employee that is paid just like anybody else. And so that's when they changed the sheltered workshops, and they started to then stop being piecework and being career readiness preparation, and then moving towards employment, which included community-based employment through supports, whether that's job coaching, training within the place in which they started out, which actually Hope Enterprises was one of the first companies to stop their sheltered workshop. They're still doing contracted work, but they were paying the individuals who work there minimum wage and sometimes slightly more. And they would do certain jobs that help them gain the skills so that they can move out to the community and start working. Which is, I say, it's very similar to what I do, but in the adult world. So where I work on career preparation for students, they're working on career preparation for adults. So, maybe Johnny takes 3 years and I get him in, 10th grade. So I work on career preparation in 10th, 11th, and 12th grade. And Johnny still needs 2 years of career readiness. Well, he can go to Hope Enterprises and continue to work on career readiness and then be supported to be out in employment. Whereas maybe you have Sam who works for me for 3 years and he's ready to be out and be employed. So he works with me 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, and then boom, he has a job and he's ready to employ. The only difference is that sometimes career readiness takes a little bit longer in certain individuals than others. Again, that's okay. So if you've never been to Hope Enterprises or have never seen what they do, you might want to get onto hopeability.org and check out what they do at their company. So they do have job coaches and they do send individuals out into community to get work. And you are talking about individuals who are impacted, some who have more impactful disabilities than others. I like to say that versus special needs sometimes. So another place that is very similar to Hope Enterprises in the area where we live is called CEAS, which is Community Integrated Employment Services. And if you live around here, it's called SUNCOM. So suncom.org. And that is actually in Northumberland, Pennsylvania. Sorry that it gives you this as its little logo, but that's what came up. So Community Integrated Employment Services is the same thing as Hope, but on a different area. They also do the exact same thing Hope Enterprises does. And I was actually within SUNCOM's sheltered workshop again years ago. And they have as well been changing their program around to where they are doing community-based employment. They have some different programs that they work with. One, I don't know if they still have this, but they were doing things such as they were putting these pegs on underneath these rug mats at the time. And again, paying their individuals either the normal salary of everybody else, minimum wage or slightly above, and stop doing piece rate work. So they also have a website that you can check out. Again, it is preparation for ongoing employment. They also have something called Alternatives to Work, which, by the way, Hope Enterprises does too, where they still work on training and very similar to kind of IEP goals related to employment, to where individuals are getting some socialization, they're able to get out in their community, they're able to do some volunteerism in order to have more of a social life, working more towards little employment things, like maybe they're doing some activities within the community, maybe at a Walmart or at a grocery store nearby. So it is kind of nice because these programs are constantly changing. If you could take a moment to see what they're like, if you have a child who you think might be perfect for this program, my advice to you is always go see the programs and go see all of the programs, even if you think that your child would be a good fit for the program or not. The more you see, the more informed choices you realize that you have, and the better choice you're going to make for your child. So there are programs out there that you should be checking into. One of these programs that a lot of people don't know exists, which is called Workability's Clubhouse. This is for individuals with behavioral health diagnosis, behavioral health and mental diagnoses. They work, it's again, very similar to CEASE, but it is for individuals in particular who have a mental health diagnosis. And sometimes what happens are individuals who have this type of diagnosis really struggle to work, especially because they may have a hard time kind of maintaining that line between aggressive behavior and assertiveness. So if there is a slight concern about whether or not an individual with mental health needs is able to work in their community, you can enroll within this type of a program, and they will help prepare you for career readiness, give you a job coach, and then put you out into community-based employment and see how successful you can be, and hopefully you can get employed by that job. The next one I want to talk about is for students again, and some individuals, adults, who again are more impacted by their disability, that sometimes even career preparation, it may take a little longer. So we call this the discovery process. And I don't know if you've heard of this before. It was more towards the cities. It's now coming more towards our rural area. It's by the ARC of Pennsylvania. So if you get on here to the arcpa.org, they have the information about the discovery process on there. So discovery, I'm just going to give it to you in a nutshell here. So the discovery process is where they will send a person into your home, and they will go into the community wherever this person goes. So they will get to know your child or know the adult that they're working with in their home. If they're currently out, maybe they're volunteering or they're doing horseback riding, through a therapeutic horseback riding place. Or if they're still going to school, maybe they're, they'll come in, the person who is observing them will come into school. Maybe they will go out to the mall with them. Not that there's many of them existing anymore, but maybe they'll go out and spend some time talking about what do they see that this student or adult may need to be successful as an employee. So the discovery process is kind of long, and it can be somewhat invasive, meaning that they are coming into your home, they are going to observe you, and they are kind of gaining knowledge about what is their behavior like at home, what is their behavior like at school, what is it like out in the community. And really it's needed because everybody's behavior, attitudes is different depending on their environment. So what's great is, as these people are trained to look at particular things that this individual can do. So if they come into your home and they say, hey, wait a second, this kid can make his bed, he's really doing a great job. And then they come into school and they see that he's in a life skills program, and they see that, oh, wait, he's making his bed, he's making the bed here too. He seems to like making the bed. I wonder if he might be interested in working in a hotel. And so you take a short-term job experience and you take him to a hotel and see how he does making a bed at a hotel. Is that something he wants to do? And maybe he's nonverbal. So it's kind of like you have to look and judge his gestures and his nonverbal communication to tell you whether or not the student likes, or this adult likes, this job. And there are ways to do that. So this person is trained to kind of look for those things that maybe as parents we don't see. And I'm going to give you an example, of course. So this one time I had a student with autism, and he was in the life skills classroom in particular. And I also operate, or I used to, we still have it here, but it's not something that I'm involved with all the time, but it was called the Defenders Cafe. And students would do 8 different job task sheets. One of those was washing dishes. And this one student always wanted to wash dishes. And he was nonverbal, but he would point. So he would look at me and he would go like this and point over to where the water was. And it didn't matter what other job he had. He never wanted to do the other jobs. He's only wanted to wash the dishes. But unfortunately, we made him do the other jobs. But when he got to wash dishes, man, he was just beaming from ear to ear, loved every single moment of it. And so I started thinking, I wonder if he would like a job washing dishes. And I used to work as a teenager at a restaurant close to us. And actually, the supervisor was a cousin of mine. So I went to her and I said, hey, listen, I have this student and I think he would be a perfect fit here. And once all the confidentiality paperwork was signed, I said, would you be interested in allowing him to work here and seeing how it goes and whether or not he likes it? And she said, yeah, definitely. So I contacted this student's mom and I said, listen, I really would like to take him for a job experience. And his mom was like, no way. He's not going to want to do it. He's not going to be successful. And, he's nonverbal. Just, I don't think she saw him the way I saw him because of the job task that I was currently giving him, which I completely understood. And I said, listen, just give me 2 weeks. Give me 2 weeks. I'll prove it. And if it's not successful, then we'll go on to something else. And she said, okay. So she gave me 2 weeks. I took him there and he learned how to wash dishes from another individual who had been working there for many years and was training people. He was a leader himself. And so he taught this nonverbal student with autism how to wash dishes. It was awesome. The student loved every single moment of it. Every time he had to go to work, he would point to his clothes. He was very excited to get changed and to go to work. He never complained. He was like running in there and running out of there every single time. And he was doing a great job. He remembered where the dishes were to go and he would stack them up and he would make sure they were clean. He had this individual with him the entire time. And eventually I taught the trainee what his mannerisms meant and how to determine whether or not he needed help. And the trainer was just awesome with him. So after the 2-week period was up, I said to his mom, like, wow, you should see him. He is amazing. And I even took a little video so that she could see it. And she was just shocked. So pleasantly so. So then I said, will you please allow me to put him into this work internship for a while and we can see how it goes. So I started him out very small. So it was only just maybe, I think it was like an hour and a half, maybe twice a week. It was a very short amount of time. And he just loved it. And he loved it so much that eventually he didn't need a job coach support anymore because we had trained the supervisors, the employees that he worked with in what his mannerisms and behavioral kind of how he held his body, what did they mean? And also they had all the information they needed. We picked him up and we dropped him off. So I always knew he was safe because we would always be there. And we did something called fading, which job coaching support, you eventually start to fade them from the individual, which if you're ever interested in what that means, you can certainly send me a message and I'll talk to you about how that looks. It takes a long time to fade a job coach support who's definitely needed in order to support that child. There are some individuals with disabilities that you would never want to take a job coach support away from them because it could be a danger to them. And there is a way to determine whether or not it's a danger to them. So if you ever want some information about job coaching support, you can certainly contact me. So this discovery process, at the end of it, you're going to have this write-up of all of the things about this child or adult. And what things can they do? What things do they struggle with? And what might be some good employment ideas, or what are those things that they do well that we could turn into employment? And there are other parts of the discovery process. So the discovery part is just one of them. And then it moves on to other parts of the discovery process to where you're doing customized employment. Now, you might not know that term. Customized employment means that you get them a job, but it's not like, so say there's two employees working there, the individual with disabilities and a person who without disabilities. But the individual with disabilities, maybe he can only work 3 hours, where the person without disabilities is working 7. So you customize that employment for that individual. Maybe the employee who works 7 hours has 8 job tasks they have to do, but it's a stretch. So maybe they could go down to 6, and this other individual who only works 3 hours that has disabilities, maybe they could complete those 3 other job tasks that the person needs help with. So there are ways in which we can customize employment. It's not, again, it's not very popular where we are at right now, but it is in the process of moving towards this area. We are trying to get some employers to realize that customized employment is an asset to their company. And there are ways that we can show that. Another thing about Discovery is they do a visual resume, which is really awesome. I've done that with some of my students before. If you want an idea of what a visual resume looks like, certainly send me a message. I'll show you, but it involves a drive. Instead of the student giving the interview, they can plug it into a computer and show it at an interview. If the student is able to talk, that's great. They can talk their way through the presentation of their visual resume. If they are not, we can supply them with some sort of assistive communication device to where it can help them talk. But we want to give them as much support as possible in obtaining a job. Okay, so one of the last things I'm going to talk about here that I think is probably the most beneficial is agencies that offer support. So there aren't many agencies in Pennsylvania that can offer support to you and your student trying to find employment. Also, we're going to talk a little bit about waivers and what that means. So the first thing that you can see here is intellectual disability, autism, and behavioral health. So every county has, like we have Northumberland, BHIDS, okay? So Northumberland County, BH stands for behavioral health, and ID stands for intellectual disability, okay? So they must have ID. Part of that umbrella now includes autism, which it didn't used to include autism, but it does now, which is great. So if you have a child who is identified with an intellectual disability with autism or has a behavioral mental health diagnosis, they can get a county caseworker. And that needs to happen fairly quickly. You can determine when that's best for your child to have that, but some things that you can get out of that is maybe that child, you need respite care and help to care for that child. So for example, if you have doctor's appointments or something like that, and you need someone to come or on the weekend and do respite care for your child to give you time to focus on the other children that you have, then respite care can be offered. If a child, a student, adult, whoever you're working with is looking for group home placement, for example, you definitely want to have a county caseworker that you're working with. And if that's even a possibility in the future, which I always say that you need to look again at every single opportunity that you can and whatever's out there, because us moms don't live forever. And so you have to research all that you can to make sure that your child or adult with disabilities is taken care of when unfortunately you're not around anymore. And maybe your desire is for a family member to take care of your child, but if that should fall through, do you have plan A, B, C, D. I mean, you might want to keep going down. So this one happens to be for the CMSU, which is Columbia, Montour, Snyder, and Union counties. So if you live in our district and you live in Union and Montour County, then, or Union County, then you need to contact CMSU to get a county caseworker. This is where the funding stream comes from, which is what I mean. Waiver is funding stream, where the money comes from. And I'll get more specific about that. So in Northumberland County, which is this one right here, it is called Northumberland County BHIDS, which again is Behavioral Health and Intellectually Disability Support. That's what those stands for. So if you live in Northumberland County and you have a child with an intellectual disability, autism, or behavioral health or mental health diagnosis, then you need to contact the Northumberland County and get a county caseworker. Both of them require intakes. So you'll need to sign paperwork to make sure that the IEPs and the RRs or the ERs, which is an evaluation report, you would want to give them that paperwork again in order to get this all this process started. So if you have a child who needs certain, and if like one of them could be therapeutic writing. I know we have a lot of students who do therapeutic writing, which is a help for them. This is the funding stream that can help you do that. And it would be nice to talk to somebody who can tell you all the options that these county caseworkers can help you with. So one of the other ones that I think is really important that you check into is Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. Now in Pennsylvania, we call them OVR counselors. You might hear somebody say voc rehab counselors. You might hear VR counselors or vocational rehabilitation. So all of them mean the same thing, but in Pennsylvania, we call them Office of Vocational Rehabilitation Counselors, or OVR. So OVR specifically works for employment, whereas county caseworker works for like independent living home situations, and can help pay for job coaching, long-term job coaching. OVR helps with employment and job coaching services. It can also help students who are going to college. It can help pay very small, but at least it's not something that needs to pay back part of a tuition, which is not much, but it is a little something. They might also work with assistive devices. So for example, if you need some sort of an assistive device when you go to college, then you definitely want to get connected with OVR. OVR can help you pay for work boots, tools, anything that comes with employment, you can get help with through them. Now, some of their programs are what's called income-based, meaning that if you go above their income requirements, you might have to pay a portion of whatever services. It's usually not a whole lot, but it is something that you have to think about, but most of their services are free. So you definitely want to check into them. And for myself, I always send OVR applications to all juniors. And if the parents don't return them as a junior, I send them again as seniors and return them. I like to have all of my students, by the time they leave me, have an open case with OVR. The main reason why is it is a lifelong program. And so if you, let's say I help you get a job, you have a full-time job, and for whatever reason, that business decides to shut down and you become unemployed and you're 30 years old. You can call OVR and reopen your case and they can help find you employment. If you need help with your resume, you need help with an interview, you need help buying, whatever tools you need for the job, contact OVR. Both OVR and the county, they don't just keep bothering you all the time. If you need something, you have to call them. They're not just going to call you, you have to call them. So it is a service that you have to be proactive on. So what we talk about is waiver. So what I mean by waiver is if a student requires funding in order to do certain programs, and one of those programs, which we're going to talk about job coaching here down at the bottom, is they need the funding to pay for that. And job coaching support can be expensive. And you don't want that as a parent to come out of your pocket, but you want your child to be unemployed. No matter if you're talking about a kid who's going to employment, college, or in the career readiness preparation program, you want them to be employed. So in order to make that happen, maybe they need job coaching support. So OVR, you have an intake with OVR, you get deemed eligible, and you start in their program. They're going to offer, if they believe you need job coaching support, they're going to give you a couple places that they think might be helpful for job coaching support. Some of those places that we have around here are, and I don't have them listed here, but I will, if you want information on there, just let me know. One of the programs is called, oh, I have them listed under here. Hope Enterprises, Living Unlimited, and Community Integrated Employment Services. All three of these places offer job coaching support to individuals. So let's say OVR says, okay, you need job coaching support. Here are three places that you can get job coaching support from. Which one would you like to go with? They're going to give you that option, and you choose the one you want. And then they're going to start out paying. OVR will pay for the first 90 days of job coaching support. Now, hopefully you don't need a job coaching support after that. Hopefully it will be, your job coach will start to fade away and you'll be able to be employed by yourself. But let's just say then that something happens, management changes position, and you start to struggle at work. So then you need to contact them about job coaching support again. Again, you can contact OVR. Once that 90 days is up and OVR is no longer paying for job coaching support, then you're going to have to go through the county and they will pay for job coaching support. So 90 days OVR picks up, and then after that, intellectual disability, the county services has to pick up. So we call that a waiver. So there are a few different types of waivers that individuals with disabilities can get depending on their disability in order to pay for programs and services that are needed, including housing. So if you have a child with a particular need, you might want to contact the county that you live in and talk about what services are available and that you would like an intake. That way you can see the services they offer, you can identify what waiver services are, and whether or not your child is going to need a waiver in the future. Waivers have waiting lists, just like group homes have waiting lists. So if you are interested in getting a waiver or looking at group homes, do it as soon as possible. Because if you wait until your child is a senior to decide, oh yeah, this kid needs a waiver, I better contact the county because Cathy Grow said, I got to get in there and get going. Usually if you're waiting back till December of their senior year, they're not going to get the funding services for as soon after they graduate. You might be waiting a year, if not longer. So I suggest that you start as soon as possible. If you have any questions based on that, because that alone is probably the most difficult thing to understand about transition, is the agencies that operate, and everyone is slightly different. So how do you get the services your child needs? And these agencies support, besides the county services, these agencies support students with any disability whatsoever. So if you feel like you need any sort of help with anything and you don't understand it, you can either contact the agencies in particular and talk to someone. And if you don't understand it, tell them, I don't understand it. You got to be the squeaky wheel, because that's the only way your child's going to get services, or the adult that you're working with is going to get services. Be the squeaky wheel. I can't say that enough. And if you need someone to come along with you and advocate for you, then you take that person along with you, who is usually the one that gets things done. That's what sometimes we have to do. And I've had individuals who've asked me to go with them, not as like an advocacy role, but just like a person who is not involved in the situation that can have the conversation that might be a little bit more difficult to have. So one of the other programs that I think that is really beneficial for you to look at is Special Kids Network. Now it's got the word kids in it, which is, to me, I'm not quite sure why they use this, but the word kids in it, this is really a program from birth to death. That's the best way to put it. In other words, this is a program where any individual with a disability, and this is in particular called the ELKS program. So any individual with a disability can get services through Special Kids Network, the ELKS program. Again, you do have to do an intake. The information is right here that you can click on to understand it a little bit more, but they are more like an advocacy supports services group. In other words, you contact them, you do the intake, and it's usually with a nurse that comes into your home. So it doesn't have to be a medical disability. It can be a cognitive disability. And it could be, I know the one time, Aiden is a stutterer. They would probably take him in the ELKS program, because there was this one time we were trying to get him something called a Speech Easy, which is a device that he puts in his ear, almost like a hearing aid, that keeps him from stuttering. And we were trying to look for programs to help us pay to get the Speech Easy. The Speech Easy is like a $5,000 device. But it was really important for us to kind of get for him. We felt like it was a good advocacy tool for him. And we wanted to try to find a place that would help fund this device for us. Now, we did not, but you could contact Special Kids Network and the ELKS program and talk to them about what your needs are, and they can help you. I give this to students too as well, because again, when us moms are no longer, moms or dads or grandparents or whoever is no longer around anymore, they need the information and how to advocate for themselves. And let's just say Johnny needs to fill out an insurance paper when he's 25 and he has no clue how to do it. He can actually contact Special Kids Network and through the ELKS program, and they will send someone to his house to help him fill out this form. Or let's just say he goes for Social Security and he gets denied for some reason and he doesn't know what to do. He can actually call this program and receive help on, or in other words, advocacy or support in what is the next step. So there's a lot of things that the ELKS program can do. So if you want to set your child up for something like this while they're still in high school, I suggest you call them. You do, again, an intake. You may never need them, but if your child does for any reason when they get to be older, then they can contact themselves and talk to somebody and get help they need. One of those other things that I did not realize as a parent was the first time that my eldest son got a federal jury form sent in the mail. And I was like, oh my gosh. Well, first of all, the whole idea of him driving up to Williamsport was a nightmare for me. But then the second part is that, again, if he has trouble with sequencing events and his memory is not necessarily the best for long-term memory, and he struggles with central auditory processing disorder, which means information comes in and sometimes it can get a little jumbled up before it kind of comes out of his mouth, before he verbalizes it. This may not necessarily be a good thing for him to do. So I had never thought about this before, and I'd never had this come up in transition for me. So I looked at his form. Luckily, he brought it to me. I looked at his form and I thought, oh my gosh. And by the way, this can happen to any kid, no matter what type of disability we're talking about here. They can get a form like this in the mail. So I had to look at it. He did not understand how to fill it out. And I'm glad he brought it to me, because had he not filled it out, he could have had a warrant out for his arrest. So luckily he brought it to me. I helped him fill it out, which, by the way, you're not really supposed to, but I asked him if it was okay. He sat there next to me and we filled it out together. And I said to him, I don't really think this is kind of the best thing for you to do, because this is going to, you could be sequestered for a while. And I told him what that meant, and that you're going to be hearing this. He goes, Mom, I can't do that. And he was right. He can't do that. So I started to help him write down why he couldn't do that. And we ended up, he did get a dismissal, thank goodness, that he did not have to show up or appear in court. We have not gotten another jury summons of any kind for him after that, but it was a good learning experience for us and for him, because we didn't know that that would be an issue. Another thing too is like car insurance and things like that. Those are things that sometimes kids don't know what to do. And again, you can call the Special Kids Network ELK program to get some support. The other thing that I have listed on here is the Arc of Susquehanna Valley. So we talked a little bit about the Arc of Pennsylvania, which offers the Discovery program. So the Arc of Susquehanna Valley has something called the Bridge program, and the website is on here too as well. So the Bridge program does teach you employment skills and also provides some socialization. And this is really for students of any type of disability, but it is kind of slightly geared towards individuals who do need a little bit more career readiness preparation and a little bit more maybe independent living skills preparation. And so you could contact the Bridge program and see whether or not it might be something that your child could participate in. We have many programs like that around here, which would probably surprise you. So for Center of Independent Living has a program. They call it Center for Independent Living or Roads to Freedom. I heard of it in two different ways, but they offer a volunteer program for individuals as adults. And they also have some leadership programs too, that a student could get, or a child. When I say child, I mean sometimes adult, because even my adult son is still a child to me. So as an adult, they could get some services through the Center of Independent Living. Another one would be parent-to-parent connections. That is all across Pennsylvania. I'm assuming it's national too, but they provide some advocacy for parents, of support for parents, and they also do things for some students too as well. So that might be a place that you might want to contact to find out what programs they have available. We also have one here through the CSIU, the Central Susquehanna Intermediate Unit number 16. We have something called Yes to the Future, which is for individuals who are graduated or they're 16 and no longer in school. They can sign up for this program. They can work towards their GED, for example. They do offer some driving tutoring services, but again, you have to be out of school. You got to not be enrolled in school, or you can have graduated. And they do some preparation programs for employment, which I think is really great. So if you have not heard of Yes to the Future, you can get on to Google and search them up, because I think that is really something that would be awesome for individuals who might not necessarily be ready to go to work, who might be, they're definitely capable in the fact that they're able to kind of drive and able to kind of gain skills, but need just slightly a little bit more support. So you could check out Yes to the Future. I have a few students who are headed towards that direction of going from school to Yes to the Future. There's also some other programs through OVR that you might want to look into. There's something called Hiram G. Andrews, which is a type of college. It is for individuals with who have, some needs that require them to have some assessment, but also, like, an example would be maybe they're interested in going to culinary, but they don't want to go to Penn Tech. The good thing is that Hiram G. Andrews is paid for through Office of Vocational Rehabilitation. So that is something you could check into as well. So there are a lot of programs. But that's kind of everything I wanted to discuss today. It was a lot. So if you have any questions on any of this information, please feel free to reach out to me. Again, my email is cgrow, Grow, at wrsd.org. My phone number is 570-649-5138, extension 4117. I am more than willing to sit down and have a conversation with you about supporting your child, adult, or whoever you're trying to support with disabilities in their community. We can talk about work internships. I also run a program called the Defenders Trading Post, which is a retail or a thrift clothing store that operates in the public that our special education students work in. It's a vocational training program. So if you're interested in learning more about that, you can also check us out on Facebook under Defenders Trading Post. We have a webpage on there if you are interested in learning about the vocational skills that we teach and how we take those vocational skills and then basically have the seamless transition over into community-based employment. That is something we can talk about as well. Okay, if you have any questions, make sure to give me a call or you can email me. Have a good night.